there's no way your CSS is going to be effective on your HTML, so we need the selector to select it. We can divide CSS selectors into 5 categories. 5 categories of CSS selectors. 1. Simple selectors. Simple selectors select element based on name, ID, and class, just like what I have said before. You can select your element by its ID, its name, and its class. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Combinator selectors. Combinator selectors select element based on a specific relationship between them. It depends on the relationship these combinators are, these things have together. So if they are combined together, then you call it. When you call it and you put the CSS syntax to it, CSS properties and the values to it, it will affect all the combined element that you have select. Okay, yeah. Pseudo class selectors select element based on a certain state. Then we also have the pseudo element selectors. It selects the style, a part of an element, which means some part of it, not the whole part of the element. Attribute selectors select element based on an attribute or attribute value. This is what you will have to understand more. You have to read more about this. Go online, do some research about this, and you get the full details. Okay, it's very easy. All CSS simple selectors. So the most common selectors that people use is that the simple selectors that programmers use commonly, which means the most commonly used selectors, they are all the simple selectors. Simple selectors, I think that's why they are called simple selectors. They are very easy to call. You can call it very easy. So these are some simple selectors. We have about 5 selectors here, so I will explain it to you now. ID selector. This ID selector is a kind of selector that it selects the HTML element too, but it has to be with this arch symbol. This is how you call it. You call it this arch symbol. So actually, okay, for example, I call arch first name, which means I'm calling this first name. I'm selecting this first name now from the HTML file with ID selector, which is arch. The arch now is the ID selector. This is what you use to select IDs. So first name is an ID selector, and I selected it with an ID, which is an arch. Okay, select an element with ID equals to first name. So this is the first name now. The first name is the element we have on the HTML, and I'm calling it now to design it on the CSS side with ID selector, which is hash. So let's go to the other one. There is another selector which we call the class selector. Class selectors are selectors that select element with dot, which is full stop dot. This is what you use to select class element, and this is how you set your class element on the HTML side. Select an element with class. This is a class element now. So this intro is a class element, and if I want to select this intro now, I use this class element dot intro. So dot intro. This is how I select this. This is how I will call it out on my CSS file. Okay, this is just a normal selector. Select only p tags. So when I say p dot intro, I'm selecting all the tags with intro, but it's going to be on the p element, which is the p element is. So if I use p dot intro, I'm selecting all intro element in p tags. I'm selecting all intro elements in p tags. So this p tag now we'll call this element. We call this intro. P.intro class. This is the p tag. The p tag is just a main tag. You can just type like p there. When you put p there, any file in a p tag on your HTML file is what you're selecting. So it's not really separating. So if you want to separate your files, if you want to separate your element, mostly you use a class or ID. Element p, select all p elements. This is just same as this one. You select all the elements in a p tag. This p now is like a paragraph. If I say p, if I put this p now on my CSS file, it will select all the elements on the paragraph tag. It will select all the elements on the paragraph tag, which is p. So it's very easy to call element p. You just put it there, p dot, and you select all the elements that you want to call in the p tag. Element/element, and div. This is how to call the div and the rest of it. So it's very easy. Div element and all p elements. Element, dot div p. It will select all the div elements and all p elements, which means you're calling the elements now by div and by p. So if it has to select element now, to select div, every element in the div, and every element in the p tag. So this is just like two callings. This is two callings. You're calling the div tag and you're calling the p tag. So it's going to select all elements in the p tag and the div tag. How to add CSS. Okay, if a browser wants to read a style sheet, it will read the HTML file according to the information in the file, and this depends on the way you add the CSS in the file. So there are separate ways to add CSS. This section is actually talking about if you are adding a CSS to a file. If a browser wants to read it, it will read it according to the HTML syntax, according to the HTML insert, the way you insert the HTML. So there are separate ways to insert HTML in a file. And the ways to insert them. There are three simple ways: internal CSS, external CSS, and inline CSS. I will explain that to you. So you should just take note of these three properties for inserting CSS. They're very important. Okay, first one is internal CSS. Internal CSS is defined inside the style tag in the head section, which means it is added to your tag. It is added any style sheet that you want to add internally. It's always added in the style tag in the head section. It can be used on HTML page if it has one unique color for all elements in the page. Internal styles are defined inside the style tag in the head section. So this internal CSS is a kind of CSS file that you can add inside your HTML page without creating a CSS file. You can add it in your HTML file without creating a CSS file. So I'm just going to explain the coding for you here. Like I said, there's not going to be live coding, but this CSS tutorials, I've already explained some of it on live coding, so you can actually check